You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Termina هناك لشوارزنيجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
It's a live podcasto. Kevin, how are you doing?
I am doing great, Duane. It's soccer today. It's Wednesday. And I've been looking at the schedule for next week and the week after. And where am I supposed to sleep, actually? Where is the sleeping going to go? I don't know, but I can't wait.
You can sleep in your bedroom, I'm sure, Kevin. But
but when? When? Yeah, well, where in the schedule, I was thinking. But when? Yeah, that's another good question.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Sleep on the floor, on the couch, on top of the TV. The cat can sleep on your head. Lots of options. Lots of football coming down the pipe in the days ahead with the Copa Centenario, the Centennial Cup.
Centennial
Cup, as we're calling it. It starts on the 6th, and then, of course, on the 10th, the Euro, my favorite tournament of the calendar every 4 years. It gets going a lot of exciting times. And more importantly for our listeners right now, well, not more importantly, as importantly, let's call it, Soccer Today with its live daily, 5 times weekly launch on Monday. This is our last test show. This is in many ways kind of feels like it's part of that sort of cycle because we're going to do a show today. Then we're going to have 2S Extra on Friday. And then we're going to get going with the daily shows on Monday. It's going to be a bit confusing to squeeze our other two podcasts in during that time, but we'll figure out how that works in the days ahead. But in the meantime, we're going to have Soccer Today 5 times a week during that tournament. And then you're also going to have, open lines at night and a whole bunch of other stuff in the SPN Nation. It will just keep floating around, Kevin.
Exactly. Right now, you can give us a call. Go on the queue. It's our brand new soundboard system and our brand new number, the number that we will be using going forward. We changed numbers a couple times in our test period, testing out different call-in capabilities. We think we have found the one that we need to stick with for the best audio quality and for the best results for you, the listeners and the callers. So right now, give us a call, 778-400-SPN1. That's 778-400-7761. 778-400-SPN1. And as well, on Twitter, talk to us, give us a question. And if you have a question you would like me to ask Duane on the air, tweet at SportsPodNet. That's the network Twitter. So at SPORTSPODNET, SportsPodNet, and get your voices heard, people. Duane, one thing that I've been wondering to ask and I thought about is, well, we have the Euros, we have the Copa coming. We talked about on Two Solitudes, is there your horse in the Euros? What's your horse in the Copa?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I famously watched famously in my own mind anyway, watched the Colombian team qualify for the World Cup at Scallywags, the famous bar in Toronto during the last cycle and had a bit of a soft spot for that Colombian team like a lot of people do. So I might cheer for them, although I've always in the last few cycles, because of Manchester City and my affiliation and love of that team, they have had a lot of Argentines on their team. So I've kind of cheered for Argentina in the past. We have a lot of American listeners out there. So maybe I should say the USA. I don't know. Should I, Kevin?
Well, mine will be the USA. It's a little bit like 2014. You remember if go back in the archive of the Two Solitudes podcast. I was live from the Dominican Republic and I was wearing my Stars and Spangled t-shirt. It wasn't a jersey, but I had fun not cheering but not even supporting, but just watching and appreciating the U.S. men's national team and kind of wishing we were them. But this tournament still feels the fact that Canada's not there and I have countries like Costa Rica, Haiti. Hey, nothing against those countries, but I just wish Canada was there.
Yeah, I'll probably cheer for those minnows a little bit too. But yeah, it's hard when you have those CONCACAF rivalries to sort of back off for a tournament like this. I mean, one of the questions that I have around this tournament is just how legitimate it is and how much these teams are going to take it seriously. And that's going to be a topic point in the days ahead. And perhaps if you want to call us about that, is this a real tournament? There's a question for the day. I'll ask you out there, the listeners, is this a legitimate tournament or is this just kind of a money grab exhibition? That's something that we can debate. Or is it something in between? I mean, the world is nuanced, but here in the talk radio world, we tend to do black and white hot takes. So you can go with that. However, let's move on to something a little more serious right now, and what I'm calling our story of the day. And this will be ongoing part of our format. We'll have a story of the day each day, which is the main talking point or one of the main talking points out there in the world of football. The story of the day today, to me, is the U.S. women's pay dispute with the Federation. Last night, some documents came out from the Federation saying that they're basically calling for the suit to be dropped by the Pay Equity Committee. That's not to be unexpected. Obviously, they, as the defendant in this case, are going to defend themselves, and that's what they did last night. But there were a couple interesting statements that came out of this, Kevin. One of the claims that I think is going to garner the most attention is that the 5 women that are listed as the complainants on this, U.S. Soccer claims that all 5 players earned more money from U.S. Soccer last year than every single member of the men's national team. That's going to make it very difficult to claim that there's a pay equity if that is true, right? Now, there's a lot of factors at play there. The main one being, of course, that it was a Women's World Cup year, and that is their highest payment level of the cycle. And I think most people will understand and agree that the best way to go forward is to look at things in a 4-year period, because that includes both the men's and the Women's World Cup peak and valley, right? But that is certainly something that's interesting. There's another. I want to give you one more quote, Kevin, and then I'll get you to jump in and talk a little bit about the pay dispute from your position, and I'll invite the callers, obviously, if they want to talk about this as well, to call us for that. This is a quote directly from U.S. Soccer Federation, United States Soccer Federation, on this dispute. The suggestion that U.S. Soccer has been anything other than strongly supportive of the women's national team is deeply disappointing and inaccurate. Kevin, they seem hurt by this suit. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it is quite interesting when you talk about the salary purposes. We'll see where that parenthesis of the story goes, because we didn't know that before, and today it dropped in the morning and late last night. But the complaint, the idea of the complaint as well, the tribunal they chose to do that, and the fact that it's like a precedent that could be set too in the sporting world, that tribunal not having been used before for a sporting world type of issue. So it's interesting. It's very more complex than people think, and the way the lawyers and the plaintiff of that complaint on the EOC tribunal, the way they worded the situation is in a way not devious, but with an agenda. There's the end goal of this move. I don't know if it's the actual tribunal or to win an EOC complaint or it's something else. So it's hard to say if it's not a negotiation tactic yet. We'll see. But when we have more details and more accurate comparison with the men and the women, because hey, they wanted to bring up this issue, so we're gonna have to see on paper, black and white, what's the comparison, which gets more money, sponsorship opportunities. Because I was talking to you before in the pre-production, where sponsorship opportunities for the women's national team in the States for the players. If you're looking at the cereal box where Alex Morgan was there, did you see Clint Dempsey recently in a cereal box? I didn't. I saw Hope, and I saw Alex Morgan on those boxes. So it's just an example. But recently, the sponsorship opportunities have been bigger for the women's side of the U.S. men's national team. So it's going to be interesting to see where the judge, if it goes to a judge, where the decision is based, and which salary they do take into consideration. Because if they start adding outside salaries into the consideration, it could be the downfall of that complaint.
Yeah. When it comes to sponsorship opportunities, I tend to take a bit of a step away unless they're directly from U.S. Soccer, unless U.S. Soccer is arranging them, then that it is hard to include it in that, just as it is difficult to conceptualize what the NWSL salaries that the women receive and the support that U.S. Soccer gives to the NWSL, how that factors into this and how this factors into an equal treatment of the two genders when it comes to U.S. Soccer. So nuanced, this. And I mean, I know that this becomes a very emotional debate for a lot of people. out there on both sides of the debate when it comes to this. I mean, we talked about how U.S. Soccer, with that statement that I read out, was, they seem sad. They seem hurt by the fact that the women have taken them to court in this regard. The women obviously are quite angry. They're quite upset themselves about this, and then they feel that they're abdicating for the rights of themselves and for the future generation of the sport. So there's a lot of sort of emotional positions in this, and I think that that's maybe going to make it difficult for people that feel strongly one way or the other to hear the other side when it comes to it. But there is a lot of nuance to this. I mean, none other than the fact that if you just look at labor laws and how CBAs work and all those sort of things, it's a CBA. The women negotiated the contract that they're in. They negotiated the security of salary over the possible earning potential of bonuses. And that's one of the biggest disparities in how they make money. I ran the numbers a while back, Kevin, and I looked precisely at what the two figures gave and figured out how much each would have made over the 4 years. I don't have them in front of me right now, but it was quite startling how much more the men did make during the 4-year run when I did do those numbers based on the CBA negotiations. I do think there are ways that in the next CBA that certainly U.S. Soccer should be looking to address and close that shortcoming. And I do think that the women have a much stronger standing to fight a CBA this time than they did last. And the question, if you look at, get back to labor laws, and I don't want to bore people too much about this, you have to look at whether that CBA was negotiated in good faith and wasn't sort of holding the women unfairly to accord based on their gender back then. And that could maybe make what was negotiated collectively void, right? So a lot of complicated legal issues at play here, but it certainly is, as I said, an issue that gets a lot of people going. I was reading on Twitter today, like people, not even Americans, that are just discovering this for the first time, that their initial reaction is based on the headlines out there. And they're going, well, how can the women not get paid the same amount? And, it's hard to argue with that, but it's also, when you start looking at it, difficult to get past the point that maybe they are. Maybe there's more at play here. And it's just so complicated, Kevin.
No, it is very more complicated than that. Give us a call. Give us your opinion on the whole situation with the EEOC complaint and the whole procedure surrounding this issue on the studio line of the Sports Podcast Network. That's 778-400 SPN1. 778-400 SPN1.
All right. Today, our main topic, normally we'll have a guest each day. I talked about how we'll have a story of the day, which is what we just addressed there. We'll also normally have a guest, which would come in right now. However, when we have a West Coast guest, as we do today, we're going to book them for the back half of the hour just for time zone reasons. And today, that is the situation, as I said. So Daniel Squizzato is going to join us at about 25 minutes to the hour to talk about the Voyageurs Cup. That starts, it started already, but the semifinals of that competition start tonight. Toronto and Montreal play in Toronto, and Ottawa is hosting the Vancouver Whitecaps in an historic matchup for the Ottawa Fury of the NASL today, where it's the first time they get to play an MLS team in a competitive environment. In fact, I think it might even be the first time they're playing an MLS team, period, because they haven't played TFC2 before and the Impacts and FC Montreal before, but I'm not aware of them playing an NASL team in the preseason, Kevin.
No, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see Vancouver Whitecaps and Ottawa play together in the Voyageurs Cup. I just can't wait to see if Ottawa can bridge that gap and be competitive, and to see how Vancouver treats that competition as well.
Yeah, we talked about it on our show with Stephen Sandor last Friday. Alphonso Davies, Canadian phenom, 15 years of age. He came out of Edmonton's system. FC Edmonton had him when he was very young. He made the choice to move to the Vancouver Whitecaps residential academy, so he's now a Whitecaps homegrown potential property, only 15, and the club has decided to allow him to make his professional debut at 15 years of age tonight against the Fury in Ottawa. So that is, if he does see action, of course, he's on the roster, but all accounts suggest that he will. So that is an interesting storyline to watch outside of that. So that's another talking point. If anyone wants to call us, talk about the Voyageurs Cup. Obviously, we're going to see whether Daniel can take your calls too. Kevin's going to work the technical side out of that. If he can, then we'll certainly have that option for you. If not, then we'll work it out for days ahead. But if you have questions about the Voyageurs Cup in the meantime, give us a call. If you want to talk about Alphonso Davies and your hopes around him, give us a call. If you want to talk about anything MLS, anything soccer related anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. Give us a call. The Bulgarian third division. I'll fake it, but you can talk about it if you want, Kevin.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more Soccer Today.
Thank you for calling Rollins Studios. This phone call is preserved.
My old man thinks poetry's for sissies. Mama wants a love song that'll get her eyes all misty. Sister wants a melody, just something to sing along to. Wife says keep it down there, 'cause baby's sleeping in the next room. I just want a little something for myself. I'm hanging up all my dreams of rock and roll, leaving those shirts up on the shelf. I'm moving on.
And welcome back.
Absolutely.
That's very mellow song, Kevin.
Yes, we thank St. Clair once again for their songs and the music on the Sports Podcast Network. You can listen to St. Clair on stclair.bandcamp.com. And we go with our first caller of the day, area code 306. What's your name and where you are calling from?
Hey, it's Jeff Salisbury calling in from Saskatoon. How you guys doing?
Jeff, what's up, buddy?
Hey, Saskatchewan.
Not too much. No, I didn't call Duane to talk about Wynyard topics, although I'm sure that would have been fine. It was Wynyard you were at, wasn't it?
I was in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, Jeff.
Maple Creek, that's what it was. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, just calling. Wanted to ask your guys' opinions on what Ottawa could actually do to pull out a result tonight against Vancouver. How you guys see that tie going?
I'll jump in first, Kevin. I mean, look, the first unfortunate fact of this is that Julian and more importantly, I think for this year's team, Jeong's not on that roster, so it's going to make it a little bit harder for Ottawa. It's a team that struggled in the NASL to start the year, but a lot of it's going to depend on what Vancouver does, right? If they play 5-6 of those young kids out there and Davies gets a run out and so on and so forth, that's a great story. But these are professionals and they do have an element of pride out there. And they do have some players that were around last year in that run. I do think that it's possible. It's conceivable even that Ottawa could get the result tonight. Now, whether they can do that again in a week's time by flying across the country, having to play in the middle of there, that could be a different question altogether, especially when Vancouver will hold the cards and the depth advantage to they pull some of those kids if it doesn't work out. So I would suggest, Jeff, that had Julian and DeYoung been there, I think that I would have put Ottawa even as a slight favorite tonight based on how I think Carl Robinson is going to play this. But as it stands now, I think that they might be able to scrape out a 1-0 or even a draw, a 0-0 or something like that. But I think Vancouver's the heavy favorite back in BC place. Kevin, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just look at the second game of the play-in series of the Voyageurs Cup where Ottawa lost 2-0 at home against a team of Edmonton. They're really trying to upset the tie. But they did win 3-0 at Clark Stadium in Edmonton. So they can pull a result. They can maybe pull, maybe not the upset over the two games, but maybe over the first one. We'll see. But the way they play the second one brings doubt to me to see if they will have the depth to juggle both games and the calendar as well in the NSL. We'll see. But for me, when you're looking at Ottawa, it's still a chance. It's still for them the opportunity to make a big name in the Canadian soccer scene. If they make the result, and if they're the first in ASL to pull off a result against a MLS team, it has great, it's an asterisk, and it's something that's going to be remembered for Ottawa fans. But like, we were the first one to do this. We're not the first team in ASL in Canada. Edmonton was here first. We were the first one to achieve a result in the Amway Canadian Championship, and that's what they have to go and run faster for.
Jeff, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just wondering, you're a bit of an outsider. I know that you kind of follow the Whitecaps a little bit closer than the others, but what's been your highlight over the years of this competition? I wonder, just as a fan, what your favorite memories of it are.
Probably to the chagrin of any FC Edmonton supporters out there, but watching FCE go down 2 years in a row with 90 plus. I think it was about the 96th minute both times. Going out of the competition both times around the 96th minute. That's maybe not necessarily a highlight, but just something that really only this competition could provide. Probably a big highlight was watching Montreal take out TFC in the first edition, or at least win over top of TFC, who were coming in as the big touted MLS club coming in, and it was the lowly, what were they at that time? USL 1, Montreal Impact. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of a highlight. Seeing some of the young Canadian guys get runouts like Hansen Boakai, when he lit up Montreal in Edmonton a couple of years ago. That was really impressive to watch as well. So those are some. I think my highlights are a little different than your average fans, but those are some of my big highlights. So
yeah, let me just tell you about that Montreal, that first year. For those that are listening there, I think Jeff's right in that even as a TFC, at that time, a diehard TFC fan, but as a still guy that hangs around and talks about TFC and I guess still is a TFC fan right now, that first competition remains my highlight in many ways too, because just the intensity of it has never really been matched. The intensity of that final game at BMO Field, which was the 1-1 draw, just never been matched. But it was the magic of the cup in every way, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't a knockout competition, but the way TFC lost that, even though, as you put it, they were taking the big bad MLS team down a notch, was kind of the narrative that survived. But the reality was that there's a lot of circumstances that went into that. The Whitecaps were actually the only team to beat TFC in the run. They did that on Canada Day. So whenever Vancouver won recently at BMO Field this year, and a lot of people were falsely reporting it as their first win at BMO Field. It's not true. They won as a USL team in 2008 there, which was the result that denied TFC the first ever Voyageurs Cup, not the first ever Voyageurs Cup, but the first ever Canadian Championship with the Voyageurs Cup attached to it. The Montreal Impact,
Martin Nash's penalty.
Exactly, which wasn't a penalty, but at any rate.
It's like Alain Côté's goal. It wasn't good.
TFC's had the majority of the play, and these underdog teams, they bunkered in, they held down. It was just like watching an FA Cup match in England when, I don't know, Scunthorpe United was beating Manchester United. I'm dreaming a bit with that one, but you know what I mean? Like it was just kind of had that feel about it, with the big team throwing everything it can at it and just not able to score. And I can still remember the final whistle and the Impact fans charging down to their supporters, and the TFC players just sinking into the pitch, and like, how did we manage to not win this? It was a great competition, Jeff.
Yeah, for sure. Do you guys mind taking a second quick question?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. You touched on something there, Duane, when you're talking about how both JDG and De Jong are going to be missing for Ottawa. And I mean, Bradley and should be Giovinco gone for TFC, but he's just out injured. And same thing with Altidore for that matter. And then I'm trying to think if Vancouver's going to be missing anybody due to internationals. But regardless, a lot of people have been freaking out about the fact that the semifinal series is taking place during, two huge competitions in the Copa America and the Euro. And then also the fact that the FIFA window is happening right now as well, with Canada with a couple of friendlies pulling away some players. Honestly, though, was there any other way that they could have done it considering the timeline? My personal opinion is no, and that people just need to suck it up and realize that that's sort of the way that the cookie's going to crumble this year. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll start again, Jeff, and then I'll let Kevin jump in. I mean, look. Two thoughts on this. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, the timing. I think that it's especially unfortunate that some of the bigger name Canadian players are being pushed out of this. I mean, we're having a Canadian championship. Julie de Guzman, Marcel de Jong, Will Johnson's not going to be able to be involved because of their national team obligations. And that seems a bit absurd, because I think you want to encourage Canadian involvement in this competition. No, that's going to allow the young Whitecaps fan players in particular to get in there. So that's going to counter that a little bit. But They had to make the change last year because of the Women's World Cup. But the other side of this that some people need to realize and need to sort of hold on to and accept as a necessary evil to this change, Jeff, is that part of the change is to anticipate this becoming the open competition that everyone wants it to become. When they add extra rounds to it, it's going to have to start earlier in the spring. I suspect that the MLS teams are still going to come in around now, which I think ideally I'd like to see them come in earlier in the competition eventually, but they probably for the first couple years of the openness of it will still come in at the semifinal stage. And you need to have that March, April, May to get sort of the play downs done. And that was the only way to have it happen. Kevin, do you have any thoughts before we say goodbye to Jeff?
I am disappointed with the format because it does give you like a false joy. Yeah, we win the ticket to the Champions League. That's in a year and a half from now. When it comes to the point, it's a year from now, but still it takes that joy away because you don't even know if you're going to be part of that championship. So I do feel subconsciously it will maybe that third effort that the guy would make in the final game, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if that happens this year in the final of that tournament. But it's that for me. It's like, well, yes, it's good, but in a way, the roster is going to change so much up until where the tournament is that I don't know. I still have difficulty to make my opinion on the calendar of the Voyagers Cup for now.
All right, Jeff, we do have Daniel on in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you for your call today, and thanks for your support of Canadian soccer over the years. Hopefully one day you'll have Rough Riders FC to cheer for, or you're going to be holding out for that Saskatoon team.
Oh, yeah, there's work underway for something on that, so just trust me on that, all right?
Okay, we'll trust you, Jeff.
All right, again, lines are open. 778-400 SPN1. That's 778-400 SPN1.
That would be quite the derby. Saskatoon Regina, the what would you call it? The Prairie Dog battle, the
Black Hole Derby. I would go with the From the Black Hole. Like you can listen to Jeff on From the Black Hole on rednationonline.ca as well, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And Jeff, if you don't know Jeff, he's one of the guys that travels probably to more Canadian national team games than anyone else out there. I would suspect that he's probably seen more Canadian national team games. I don't know, maybe Lord Bob might have Ben Massey might have a few words to say in that, but he'd be up there for sure. I've seen him in Toronto. I've seen him in Montreal. I've seen him out west. He's a guy that travels all over the place. And that's the great thing about the Voyageurs. They may be small, but they're mighty when it comes to their willingness to travel to all corners of the globe to support the Canadian men's national team, which is never really been for the glory. Now has it.
No, exactly. And as well as the Voyageurs Cup, it's always interesting to keep an eye on the US Open Cup. We talked about it with Josh Hakala on USL Radio last week. So if you're a big USL Radio and USL and especially US Open Cup fan, I urge you to go to sportspodcastnetwork.com. There's 2 shows over the last 7 days. 2 Upfront Soccer show with Baxter Colburn. They had Josh Hakala on as well to talk more about the American team and the actual bracket. And Josh Hakala with the history of the U.S. Open Cup and the more glory possibilities of upset on the 2S Extra last week and USL Radio.
Exactly. That's an interesting topic point there. And we have 5 minutes before we're going to take another quick break and bring Daniel on the line. So maybe let's talk about that. Last year, one of the big talking points in the U.S. Open Cup was the NESL with all their bravado, all their talk, all their macho-ness about this. They were unable to really do anything in their USL matchups. Now, the Cosmos had a bit of a run. They were able to beat one of the New York MLS teams. I think it was NYCFC, if memory serves. But nonetheless, when you look at the overall results of the NESL in the US Open Cup last year, it was pretty bleak, and it really did not help them in their argument that they are a second-tier league and that the USL is some kind of farm league when they couldn't even beat them in those matchups. So do you think, Kevin, that's indicative of something, or was that just kind of luck? Do you think that they're going to be geared up this year, the NASL team, to mandate a memo from front office to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
I think it's exactly what it is this year. I think the NASL received a little memo, a little email, or they went right to the private folder, not into the general inbox, and said, look, dudes, this year we're not going 7-0 again in a round against the USL and US Open Cup. All right? This year we're making a statement. We'll see. The OKC Derby is the one that gets my attention because Rayo, Duane, you're one of your darling team of this year. Samaras, one of the best in the history of the league so far. But when you're looking at the rosters of both teams, it should be an actual competitive game. And I wouldn't be surprised if Energy is close to Rayo in that game. So I just can't wait to watch the Energy literally in the stands and on the pitch on this game.
Exactly. And there was some controversy in that game too. If those who don't know, that because of comments that were made about the quality of the Rayo pitch, when the first game of the year, there were apparently nails still on the pitch because they were still kind of laying it down. And Josh talked about that, I believe, in the interview. They denied away ticket sections, away ticket fans, like tickets being sold to the Energy fans in this. So they're trying to create some bad blood already. A little bit short-sighted to not have allowed ticket sales. That always drives me nuts when teams in North America try and do that when it's relatively close, because if fans want to travel, they're going to travel. And without any rules around the segregated section, all that's going to do is make it more difficult for your security staff to keep things in touch, because there's going to be fans everywhere. It's like the Impact TFC game earlier this year. I went as a fan. I decided not to go on a media card that day. I wanted to enjoy my day, and it's full. So I bought a ticket. I didn't buy a ticket at the TFC Sports section, though. I just went on to impact.com there and bought the tickets. So it's really, really impossible to try and police that sort of stuff, Captain.
No, exactly. And I don't think the establishment or individually each team is aware of the actual culture, especially in the lower division. I don't like that expression too, because it has a negative connotation. But in Division 2 and 3, like, they're not necessarily used to the away travel all the time to that effect. And I don't know if Rayo were especially aware of what could be with Energy that does have a organized support in the USL and has a pretty decent crowd. It's not the biggest. It's not like 15, 25,000 like Cincinnati and Sacramento, but it's not either Toronto and Montreal with a couple hundred people. That being said, there was around 1,000 people in the first game of the CCR for the FC Montreal, but it's not the same for Energy. They had 4,000 or 5,000, I believe, attendance average usually. So it's pretty decent crowd, and the support is organic. It's a loud support, so it would have created a great atmosphere to have the two supporters faction battling out in chance, because it would have been the first time opportunity for them to do so.
Well, exactly. Quickly, we have one more minute before the break. I'll tell you who I'm most looking forward to watching in the U.S. Open Cup. I'll be at the Voyageurs Cup game in Toronto tonight, obviously, so I'll be following it more or less on social media and stuff. But I am curious to see how Cincinnati does. I'm watching them closely in this tournament because of their great splash they've made off the pitch in terms of their fan support, and they've been decent on the pitch as well. I'm very interested to see what Sacramento can do. I think that's a team that really, that's one of the last places that they have to conquer, is to do a bit of a U.S. Open Cup run. I'm curious to see how like a team like Rochester can do that has a tradition in this tournament. Any teams that are jumping out at you that you want to see and are watching carefully in the U.S. Open Cup side of things?
I am wondering what the Swope Park Rangers does. They're not even in the tournament. It's true. The MLS 2 sides are not there. So, because Mark Dos Santos is what I keep an eye on, because it's not going well for Kansas City. So I'm wondering when the jump is going to be taken. I do believe it's going to be in 2016. But outside of that, I do believe if the USL team like a Rhinos, like a Battery, maybe not the Battery this year, it seems to be struggling, but the Richmond Kickers or a team like this, would love to see them go on a run to continue or to help grow, because the league is growing so fast and it's growing bigger than everybody anticipated, and to have a result in US Open Cup, not a win, we all know what we're talking about, but a result, move maybe around further than they anticipated, would give credence to that growth of the league, and would actually be the growth of the league, not just the amount of teams, but the quality as well. It would be a reflective of that.
All right, before we take the quick break, the other team that, of course, everyone watches for good and bad is the New York Cosmos, and whether or not that they can do something. They spend a lot of money. If there's going to be, and I'll say this, as much as people love to hate the Cosmos, they are spending money. I think they are clearly the best NASL team. If there is an NASL team that could potentially win this tournament, and oh my God, could you imagine the craziness on Twitter if it happened? It would be the New York Cosmos. All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to bring Daniel Squizzato on the line, and we're going to interview him about the Voyageurs Cup, both past and present.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back on Soccer Today. We are proud to welcome Daniel Squizzato of MLSsoccer.com to the show. How you doing, Daniel?
Good. How you doing, Kevin?
I am doing awesome.
Hi, Daniel. How you doing? You
Oh,
just answered
good.
that. So
I was worried maybe you had just passed out during the break, Duane, but good to hear you there too.
yeah, look, it's it's like Letterkenny there. Hey, how you doing? Good, and you? That's like we're going back and forth with that sort of stuff there. That's a Canadian comedy that anyone should check out if you don't know. But Daniel, we wanted to have you on to talk about Voyageurs Cup. You are our resident Voyageurs Cup expert. You wrote a great article on the history of the tournament for MLS Soccer. That was last year, right?
They all blend together now. It might have been earlier this year, but it's definitely up there if people search for it.
Yeah, let's start there before we get into the specifics of this year, Daniel. Tell any American listeners that are out there right now listening to this, or anyone in Canada even that's maybe newer to following the domestic game, why this tournament matters and why that name Voyageurs Cup matters.
Sure. You and I, Duane, the other day got in a bit of a tete-a-tete on Twitter about the hashtag that should be used in reference to this tournament. And I don't think either of us will have an answer just because there seem to be 5 different versions that people use. But when it comes to the trophy itself, the short version is that the Voyageurs, as the Canadian soccer supporters group, has existed since 1996. And in the early part of the 21st century, a number of people on the Voyageurs message board got together and they decided they wanted to have some kind of domestic cup. And at the time, there were no plans at the CSA to do any such thing because there really weren't very many pro franchises at the time. So members of the Voyageurs, I think, about 35 people altogether, raised a few $1,000s, got a trophy made, eventually were able to connect enough with the clubs that this was something that they were going to give out on a yearly basis to the team that finished highest in what was then the USL First Division. And for the first, I believe, 6 or 7 years of the trophy's existence, it was the Montreal Impact over and over and over again. There was no tournament, there was no Canadian championship, but the Voyageurs themselves, as the supporters group, would award this trophy to the team that finished highest, the Canadian team that finished highest. Then, of course, you had the Whitecaps and the Impact eventually moving up to MLS, Toronto FC coming into the equation, and a deal was struck that the CSA could use the Voyageurs Cup trophy as the championship trophy of the newly created Canadian Championship Tournament. But that little bit of history to it, I think, is why so many people that have followed the program closely for a long time are so defensive about the name and refer the tournament as the Voyageurs Cup and don't want to even call it the Amway Canadian Championship, which, on the one hand I get, and on the other hand, whatever you think of Amway, they are giving money to the CSA, which helps fund Canadian soccer. But yeah, that's a bit of a snapshot of it there. And if people are interested in seeing me write in a babbling way about it at length, as you said, it's on MLSsoccer.com. Folks can find it and get a bit more of the detailed history there.
Yeah, Daniel, can we agree that it's not the Canada Cup? Can we agree on that one?
We can agree that it's we can agree that it is not the Canada Cup. It is not the Amway Cup. It's not the Amway. It is if you must call it the Canadian Championship, that's fine. But I'll stick with Voyageurs Cup, just not Canada Cup. That's the Canada Cup. The only appropriate usage of Canada Cup is to describe that hockey tournament that's happening later this year. But it has a completely different name, and everyone knows where I stand on that. So let's not get sidetracked too much.
We'll have you on 5 rings for that one, Daniel. One more quick question on the history. I asked our caller, Jeff, and you know Jeff as well as I do, about what his favorite moments of the tournament over the years were. So just put your fan hat on for a second and give me what your favorite moments of the Voyageurs Cup over its or the Canadian Championship over its, it can be Voyageurs Cup if you want to, but over its run.
Oh, see, now I've got the little bug in your ear. Now you're not even sure what to call it. I mean, as an admitted TFC partisan, I think that the moment that jumps to mind is what's known as the Miracle in Montreal back in 2009. I wasn't able to attend the game, but I was at a local establishment in Toronto with many fellow TFC fans, and that, of course, was the game in which TFC needed to beat Montreal by 4 goals to win the Voyageurs Cup. Gave up a penalty early, but ended up winning 6-1 on the back of a hat trick from Duane de Rosario. So, as putting my fan hat on, I mean, that would obviously be the moment that sticks out the most. But as a follower of the Canadian game, I think that some of the hashtag narratives that have been woven through the tournament as it's gone along. I mean, the Whitecaps not winning for the first 13 years despite coming close once and again. I mean, that was a narrative until it was broken last year. I mean, unfortunately for fans in Edmonton, it seems every year brings them some new variety of heartbreak. When it comes to the Voyageurs Cup this year being no different, but to see the way that things have developed in that city, and the opportunity to see some of these young Canadian kids get opportunities in first team situations is something that we see a lot of in the Voyageurs Cup. Now, those kids don't necessarily always pan out over the long run, but giving them a chance to play, seeing them, and allowing us as Canadian fans, some of those brief moments to dream of what the future will hold if so-and-so turns out the way that they're looking. I mean, that's a fun part of the Voyageurs Cup as well. And I think that, the way the rosters are shaping up for the semifinal round this year, we're hopefully in store for a few more of those moments this year as well.
What do you expect out of the tournament this year, Daniel? Do you expect any of the MLS team to really not prioritize this version of the Voyageurs Cup? Do you think it's going to have an effect of the calendar? What's your thoughts on the first semifinals for tonight's game? Do you think there's any chance of an upset and all that? What are your thoughts on the MLS rosters of the Canadian team in the Amway Canadian Championship?
Well, I mean, as you guys were discussing a bit earlier on in the show, it is a bit difficult in this particular instance just because there is the international break. You've got members of teams that are even away with the Canadian national team, but then you've also got players that are away for the Copa America Centenario, and some players that are away with their national teams just for playing friendlies during the international break. And so every team, right off the hop, all the 4 remaining teams have been affected by that, which is cutting their rosters a bit short. And then, of course, you have the situation, and it irks me a little bit when people occasionally act as though Canadian teams playing less than full choice squads for the Voyageurs Cup games is somehow demeaning to the tournament or an indication that they don't necessarily take it seriously. I mean, I think you can pretty much look at any cup competition in any country in the world, and you'll see teams that are fielding usually less than first choice lineups for cup games. And so I don't think that there's any particular conspiracy by the Canadian teams here. Now, that being said, you look at some of the names that are going to be part of this roster, start with Toronto, for instance. They've got their big 3 away. They've got, Will Johnson away. And so just by necessity, as much as anything, you're going to see some of these Canadian, your Mo Babuli, who we've already seen. You'll probably see Jay Chapman in there. And, who knows, they might even, call up a kid like Raheem Edwards from TFC2. And Duane, I know you'd love to see that if that happened. Mm-hmm. In Vancouver, I think they've got 8 Canadian kids that they're bringing with them. The most notable of whom is Alphonso Davies, who's 15 years old. And, you can look at that one of 2 ways. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, wow, that's amazing that, if we had a chance to see this 15-year-old kid play, that would be really cool. The other approach one could take is, if Vancouver is going to play a 15-year-old, clearly they don't take this tournament seriously. But I think that there is, it's always going to be a balancing act with this tournament, because none of these teams are, just by the nature of the leagues and the competitions that they play in, are going to be blessed with multitudes of depth. And so this tournament is always going to be a chance to see some of these less used players. In a lot of cases, these are Canadian players. And as I said, from a Canadian follower's perspective, that is one of the things that appeals to me in this tournament. And as a Toronto FC fan, if Toronto's youngsters are the ones that can prevail over the other competing sides, then all the better.
We're talking to Daniel Scuzado of MLSsoccer.com. You have a question for Daniel, give us a call. 778-400-SPN1. That's 778-400-SPN1. Daniel, you mentioned Anson Boakai and you mentioned Davies more recently. You mentioned the fact as well that it might be too early. Do they really deserve it? And is it considered like a treat? Like, okay, you worked hard all training camp this season as well. You perform well. Here's a treat. We'll make you play this Amway Canadian Championship where you have a chance to be discovered, to have a chance to create a bigger fan base. What's your thought on the Vancouver Whitecaps playing a Davies or Montreal a Tabla or a Boakai back then for Edmonton?
Yeah, well, the first thing I will say is that I didn't explicitly say Hanson Boakai's name, although you did figure out who I meant. I think it was pretty clear from the context who I meant, and yes, I was referring to the savior of Canadian soccer, Hanson Boakai, who
handsome bow tie.
Yeah, the handsome bow tie, and so that's one element of it, is that, you know, seeing the way things play out. You know, I'm always hesitant to you know, anoint any of these kids as anything, especially in their teenage years. I mean, you know, a couple of years ago, it was you know, Marco Bustos, you know, making his debut, and now he, you know, he's not necessarily gotten over the mountain just yet, but, you know, he's continued to you know, stick with the Whitecaps and make his way onto the Canadian national team as well. But that's a good point you raised, Kevin, when it comes to looking at it as this is a treat for these Canadian kids. And I think that is a good way that you can look at it. You know, you mentioned Balou Tabla, and I think David Chouanière is also going to be part of the team, the Impact roster. For those who aren't familiar with him, you know, he's a 19-year-old kid with FC Montreal. He's been with the Canadian national team for or the youth ranks for a few years now. You know, one of the highly touted prospects in the Canadian system. But yeah, I mean, maybe this is a matter of putting these kids in the shop window. And I almost wonder, you know, now that you raise it, if it's a matter of not even necessarily bringing them into these games to get them ready to play for the first team of Montreal or of Vancouver, of Toronto, Ottawa, or Edmonton, but to put them in the shop window for international teams, you know, for you know, for them to say, hey, look at how well this kid did, you know, and potentially facilitate a move for some of these kids to international clubs. Because, you know, I mean, that's a sticking point for a lot of Canadian fans, is that, you know, we hear about, oh yes, you know, the academies are full of these promising kids, and we see, you know, any Canadian youth team roster these days is just overloaded with kids from the academies of Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. But then when we don't see those kids make the jump to the first team in those cities, the question is, what's happening? And, you know, the answer is that there's only a finite number of spots on the first teams. But if this tournament can be used as a jumping off point for some of these kids to potentially either entrench themselves in their Canadian club or attract attention from a club abroad, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation. If the kid moves, maybe the club gets some money via a transfer fee, and then that's another Canadian player, hopefully with an opportunity to work their way into a first-team environment. But when you mentioned Vancouver specifically, Kevin, I've long been one of the most ardent proponents of #WhiteCapsHateCanada on Twitter, and it fascinates me that years later, folks, you know, it's about a 50-50 split between folks who get the joke and folks who think I'm serious. But, you know, they, like I said, they've got 8 Canadian kids on this roster. We'll probably see a number of them play. I mean, you know, you've got Marco Carducci, 18-year-old keeper who's one of 2 keepers on the roster. He may not start, but he may play. Does that mean he's going to suddenly be with the Whitecaps first team? Probably not, because he's an 18-year-old goalkeeper. But I think that, you know, playing these games is a good way to keep these kids hungry and keep their eyes on the prize. And, you know, it does give something for us Canadian fans to latch onto as well. And so, honestly, it's one of the more exciting elements of this tournament from my perspective, anyway.
Daniel, it almost sounds like you just made a case indirectly for the need for a Canadian Premier League there.
Well, Duane, I mean, I would only be doing that insofar as I'm suggesting that it's important for the development of the Canadian national team for Canadian players to have as many opportunities to play as possible. And, you know, you'd be suggesting that teams with Canadian ownership and Canadian managers would be more likely to give Canadian players a chance. I mean, I don't know. Is there any recent example of a Canadian player who'd been overlooked or maybe cast aside, getting a chance under a Canadian manager with a Canadian team and now playing well? Kyle Becker. There's no precedent for that. So I don't. If you want to take my words and twist them, then you go. Right.
All right. Quick question here. Ottawa Fury, first appearance playing an MLS team in this competition. Give me the reason why we shouldn't just discount them as the quote unquote minnow in this Final Four that's just going to be cast aside on the way to the final.
I think one of the first things is what we've just mentioned in terms of, the roster that Vancouver is bringing, and that's not to cast aspersions on their motivations or on any of the players that'll be coming along, because there are definitely a number of first choice players that are part of this squad. But when you are a team and, sorry, Kevin, I know you don't like this, but from a lower division and you have the opportunity to knock off a team from a higher division, I mean, that's a motivating factor anywhere in the world, whether it's North America or Europe or anywhere else. And so I think that, as you say, this being the first competitive game they've played against a non-NASL squad, They've got the home field advantage. They've got the momentum coming off that, the win over Edmonton in the preliminary round. There's a good fan base in that city, and I know that there are people who understand and appreciate what this tournament is and what it means. And I think that that brings that extra element of motivation to it. And I know that in our hyper statistical and analytical world, this just kind of sounds like old school faffery, as in, intangibles, anybody can spew about those. And I'm sure that someone could come up with expected goals differentials and tell me why Ottawa isn't in any position to beat Vancouver. But honestly, as long as human beings are the ones competing in these sporting events, there are intangible elements that are going to play into the equation. And I think that oh God, I just made myself obsolete there. But anyway, I think that the players know what's in front of them. I think a bit of it is taken away because of, as you mentioned, the fact that guys like De Guzman and De Jong, even though De Guzman hasn't played in about a month, but being away maybe takes a little bit away from it. But there are guys on Mauro Eustáquio and Carl Hayworth and Canadian players like this who understand the importance of this tournament, and and we've seen in past years, we saw how close Edmonton got to knocking off Vancouver a couple of years ago, not just in one game, but actually defeating them and making the Voyageurs Cup final. And so I think that anyone who assumes that this tie is over before it starts is not paying much attention to history.
Fair enough. Daniel, I'm going to get you to give a prediction at the end, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a couple quick questions on the women who do play a friendly on Saturday and Tuesday as well. Any shocks with the lineup that John Herdman tracked out for those 2 games against Brazil?
None. Absolutely none. It's a 20-player roster, which is exactly the same as the 19-player roster that the team had for their friendly in April against the Netherlands, the only addition being 20-year-old goalkeeper Kaylin Sheridan, who was added to the roster presumably late to accommodate a wrist injury to Sabrina D'Angelo, who is still on the roster. I spoke to John Herdman earlier this week as part of a media call, and he confirmed kind of what one would suspect based on the rosters that he's named since last summer's Women's World Cup, which is that this is the dawning of a new era. And this is a new generation of players that he's no longer just testing, but that he is going to take to the Olympics and roll with. There are veterans on the team. You still got Sinclair and Tancredi and Matheson, and Desiree Scott and players like that. But you look at, you've got the new generation. You've got Kadisha Buchanan and Ashley Lawrence and Jessie Fleming and Janine Becky and Rebecca Quinn and Nichelle Prince and Deanne Rose and Gabby Carl, who, with all respect to Gabby Carl, he'll eventually have to make a cut for the Olympics to make it down to 18. I think Carl might be the one that gets the cut. But anyway, she's definitely one for the future. The point being that anyone who is expecting, a lot of familiar faces based on the 2012 or 2015 teams to be showing up at the 2016 games, not going to be the case. Herdman is revitalizing the squad, and hopefully they'll have enough chances together to prepare for the Olympics, which will be the biggest test that many of them have faced so far.
The one name that some people tend to throw at me when these lineups come out, an old name that's no longer there, is Kaylyn Kyle. Do we anticipate that her last days as a national team member are over?
I think that, you can never say never when it comes to any national team. I mean, you look at the way that we probably all thought José Belanger was gone from the national team years ago. And we certainly thought Carl Lang was gone from the national team years ago. And Herdman coaxed both of them back into the mix, although in Lang's case, it was unfortunately cut short. I even asked him this week whether he was thinking of bringing Karina LeBlanc back into the mix. She retired after the World Cup, but with these goalkeeping injuries, could she potentially be part of the mix? He said she wouldn't. But the point is that you never want to write off anyone, especially someone like Kaylyn Kyle, who's still getting regular minutes in NWSL, still in her 20s. This is not somebody who's past it by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, Herdman will have the option of naming a squad of alternates for the Olympics. You name an 18-player roster, and then you can have up to 4 alternates. The team had injuries at the last Olympics, and so it ended up being important to have those alternates on board. The Canadian team has some depth in midfield as it is, but I definitely think it is far, far too soon to say that Kaylyn Kyle is done with the Canadian national team. We could see her back in the mix as soon as the friendly against France in July, or possibly the Olympic Games themselves.
Speaking of futures, the U17 draw, of course, came out for Jordan as well. Any thoughts on that?
That the youth ranks are always tremendously unpredictable, and except for the fact that when you play against Germany in the sport of soccer at any age in either gender, you're probably in for a fight. It's tough to tell. I mean, you look at the other day I was looking at the roster of our 2012 U17 Women's World Cup squad. It was part of my research for the Canada v Azerbaijan men's friendly preview, now up on MLSsoccer.com. And I looked at that squad, and you realize that these youth World Cups, for a majority of players on the team, that's going to be the peak of their careers. And that's not said as an insult. That's just reality, right? And so I think it's really tough to evaluate how teams are going to match up one against the other. Really, the biggest function of these World Cups is to get big time experience for these players and try to figure out which of them are going to be locks for your team in the years to come. That 2012 team I mentioned, it had Buchanan, it had Lawrence, it had Kaylin Sheridan on it, and then beyond that, Rebecca Quinn as well, I think, and then beyond that, a number of names that have not appeared with the women's national team, and that's the case for any team. So, I have high hopes as always, and I'm sure I'll be getting up at whatever ungodly hour is necessary to watch Canada play in that U17 Women's World Cup. But whether or not we're going to dance to the podium in that tournament, I would not say that anyone should bet their house on it. No.
All right, we're running out of time, so I can't ask you about the future of the futsal program, but maybe that's for our next show, Daniel. We've got to get that prediction, though. Who do you think is going to end up standing in the do we use confetti at the end of the Voyageurs Cup? I'm not sure, but let's pretend we do. Who's going to be standing in the confetti at the end of this tournament?
Well, at BMO Field, they use fireworks even after TFC has been eliminated.
Yes.
Whether or not they use confetti, I'm not sure. I thought I had retired from V-Cup predictions. Oh, no, I just said V-Cup. Voyageurs Cup predictions in 2009 after I won the inaugural Out of Touch Voyageurs Cup prediction pool. Whoop, whoop, still going on. Go check out John O at Out of Touch for that. But, if you're talking about the two-legged ties, it's tough to see, the Fury overcoming Vancouver, whatever choices in their lineup they may have. I think they're still going to have enough to make it through. And as for Toronto and Montreal, Montreal's missing a lot of players with international duty and injuries, but TFC is of course missing their big three, and they're kind of the ones that make the world go round. So I'm really just kind of stalling here in terms of making a prediction.
I noticed, yes.
In the hopes that the time on your show will run out. So that I don't lose either my pundit cred or my TFC supporter cred, both of which I'd like to hold on to as best I can. So I'm just waiting for some kind of siren or alarm or something to go off to say that we're out of time and you didn't hear Squizz's predictions on Toronto v Montreal. Kevin, help me out. Make some kind of end of show sound.
5 seconds more.
Oh, geez. Look, it's going to be a hard fought contest. Looking at it on paper, you would think Montreal has the advantage. On paper, we're looking at another Vancouver v Montreal final for the Voyageurs Cup, and you might see Montreal get back to the top of the mountain. I'm just saying.
Is that good enough, Daniel, for you?
That is perfectly appropriate, yes.
Daniel Squizzato, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
Duane, it's at the end of the show, and I've been thinking, we had Daniel's prediction for the V Cup. What's your prediction for the Voyageurs Cup?
Boy, I'm going to do the same kind of dance that Daniel did as well. And before
let's get the crickets ready, though. You want to dance? Let's get the crickets ready.
Yeah, sorry. Before the season started, I picked TFC, and I think it'd be wrong for me to go against them, even though there's a lot of evidence right now that this circumstance and the timing of this tournament is not really in their favor. I'll say this. If Toronto can get by Montreal, I do think that they'll win the final because I think they'll take it seriously, and I believe the injury issues will be over by then. There's a possibility that Josie could be back for the second leg of this tournament as well. I think that the winner of Montreal-Toronto will win the tournament. I don't think Vancouver, based on the fact that they're planning to trot 5 kids out against Ottawa, necessarily is going to give it the full attention that it might require to beat either Toronto or Montreal in the final. So I think that Toronto still will have enough because I'm not sure Montreal is not going to match kids for kids tonight. And if Toronto can get a couple goals up, they defend well enough that I think that they can hold on regardless of their scoring problems right now. So I'll stick with my preseason pick, even though I recognize that that's becoming increasingly precarious.
All right. Tonight, Voyageurs Cup, you have Montreal versus Toronto and Vancouver versus Ottawa. Well, Ottawa versus Vancouver and Toronto versus Montreal, to be precise, tonight. So stay tuned. Stay tuned to 2S Extra Friday on the Sports Podcast Network, where you can find all the details and all the analysis of tonight's game. And Duane, until next time on SPN Radio, for Duane Rollins, I am Kevin Laramee. We wish you a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.